I'm happy to be here. I've had a very interesting afternoon reviewing the student work of Professor Rhode. And well, I am going to broach this topic of megaform as urban landscape, even though I have my misgivings about it. But as a kind of prologue, I recently was in the Museum of Modern Art, where there is a small exhibition on architecture and urbanism. Going back to the 40s, I think it's called actually 194X, actually, which is a date of projects made in the United States, at the very end of the Second World War. And that's the title of the exhibition. It's not only restricted to that work, but that's the title they chose, anticipating some kind of new realizations sometime in the late 40s. And there is a project there by Rhode, actually, for the curtain wall buildings that are now facing out, actually designed by Skidmore much later, over the park of the United Nations. Not actually a very unimpressive Meesian project. There were one or two early Mies projects, including the IIT campus, etc., etc. But one of these incidental projects carries the following quote from Mies, which is not attributed, and I recently talked to Barry Bertol. He said, I know we didn't attribute it. I can find you that reference. But it just, the fact that this was, the late 40s, was this kind of strange clairvoyance, which I'm about to read should, of course, be spoken with a heavy, slow German accent. But it goes as follows. There are no cities, in fact, anymore. It goes on like a forest. That is the reason why we cannot have the cities anymore. That's gone forever. Planning, city, and so on. We should think about the means we have to live in the jungle and maybe do well by that. I mean, I find that just unbelievable, and maybe do well by that. And this thing that I just read from my diary, because I put it down on the spot, would if I were able to publish this again, and I have already published it in a university publication for the Champaign-Urbana, where it's not yet out, but it will be published. Not very happy about it, because I think it's still very much a work in progress. But if it were ever published again, which it may never be, I would then put this as a gloss, this Mies statement as a gloss at the beginning of the text. Megaform as urban landscape, I was thinking, because I'm slightly embarrassed by this thing, because it's not that I don't believe in it anymore, but I just think it's not worked through enough. It should somehow be worked through differently. And since I also am slightly, what can I say, transfixed by titles, which sometimes, over-determine the direction in which I think I would like to go, I thought, last night I think, or something like that, in preparation for this event, that maybe it would be better to call it interstitial form and regional urbanization. That it would be a better title than megaform as urban landscape. It would be more open, interstitial form and regional urbanization. Because that's what we're stuck with. We're stuck with the fact that urbanized, exactly as Mies said, there are no cities anymore. We have to learn to live in the jungle. And this building made an undue impression on me. It dates from 1992. It's actually in Barcelona. It's designed by Rafael Maneo and Manuel de Sola Morales. And Manuel de Sola Morales is architect urbanist, basically. And, well, I think you know who Maneo is. And actually, I remember seeing a model of this building in Harvard, a little tiny wooden model with this very incredible profile. And, but it is the partner for this project, and only for this project, Manuel de Sola Morales, who I think first coined the term urban acupuncture, which I think is what one might mean by interstitial form, you know, and or one might mean by this building. I mean, that is to say, you know, the recognition of the fact that one can't do very much. I mean, this is, you know, highlights, you know, the problem of urban design, and for that matter, planning, you know. I suppose one can still do master plans in the sense of infrastructure, you know, grids, power grids, hydraulic infrastructure, road infrastructure. I suppose we can still do that in the old master planning sense. But we can't, you know, in any kind of convincing way design cities anymore, exactly as Mies said, you know. We can design maybe urban interventions, limited urban interventions, and hence, of course, we come back to this idea of urban acupuncture. It's a metaphor, of course. The idea is, you know, that you have a certain amount of money you could build in such a way in an urban fabric that it has a kind of catalytic effect on that fabric. And in this case, what we're looking at is a kind of chaos. I mean, we don't usually associate Barcelona with chaos, and the 19th century city by Cerdà, engineer, was not chaotic. But this building actually runs alongside the Avenida Diagonal, which was part of Cerdà's mid-19th century urbanization, regularization of, or expansion, even better to say, of a medieval, rather small medieval core. But since then, of course, it's all blown wide open, even in Barcelona. And we have this chaos that surrounds this rational, regularized city. And from a distance, we can see this, you know, and this is a kind of landmark. And part of the idea behind Megaform as urban landscape is that, you know, that's what we don't have. We don't have landmarks. You know, I mean, in the megalopolis, it goes on forever, as he says. Goes on like a forest, needs to go, you know. And one tree is as much like another. It's an endless proliferation of objects, and of course autoroutes and so on and so forth. But it is the French urbanist theorist who a long time ago, Francois Chouet, said the obvious thing, but we don't often reflect on it, that if it were not for the graphic signs, we'd all be lost. You couldn't find you know, in other words, as opposed to, say, traditional, even 19th century fabric, and certainly medieval fabric, and also relationship between built-up fabric and countryside, and also, by the way, of course, the spires of churches, you did have landmarks. You could find your way around without graphic signs. But of course, in this endless motopia, as Geoffrey Jellicoe called it, you can't, if you didn't have the signs, you would be, all of us would be totally and utterly lost. And so no landmarks. So part of the idea of megaform, as opposed to Rainer Ballam's concept of megastructure, and of course it's very difficult really to define adequately what is the difference after all between megastructure and megaform. I mean, the closest I can come to it is, you know, that there is this kind of formal plastic continuity is of more importance than the articulation of the structure, as let us say, you know, Centre Pompidou Paris is an articulate structure, could qualify as a megastructure as opposed to a megaform. And this, I would say, is a kind of megaform. Anyway, it is 800 meters long. It runs along the side of the Avenida Diagonal. It can be seen as an urban intervention. It definitely is a landmark. And it has other things about it which are, this is a rather inadequate site plan, but it's actually, this is the black, of course, is the intervention, rather complex. The long 800-meter block is, I hope, self-evident. I should have a pointer here, but in any case, I can hardly, I'm at such an angle, I don't know really what I'm doing, but in any case, you know, this is obviously the Avenida Diagonal. And I mean, it is a very complex building, and you know, by the way, along the line of unfinished business, I don't have and never have had in my possession fully adequate ground floor plan of this intervention. But what to my mind is very intriguing about it is this, of course, is the Avenida Diagonal. This is this universal block, which isn't really, strictly speaking, curtain wall. It is mainly office building. I suppose it could, and I think it is an aspect of the project that you could convert it to residences, which is what you can't do vis-a-vis most curtain wall buildings. I mean, it's just a nightmare to convert curtain wall office buildings into residential fabric. But here, of course, with pierced windows, rather conventional, you could perhaps achieve it. And if it should come to pass that you no longer need the office space, I mean, you know, in terms of the flexibility. I mean, this is, you know, private investment. It is actually Winterthur Insurance Company put the money behind this thing. But what is intriguing is this, you know, it has this central, or anyway, to me, it has this central arcade galleria, which is a mall, a shopping mall, basically, and underneath it, of course, parking, a lot of parking, and maybe it's necessary to change the angle. These are the shops on the Avenida Diagonal. So, the building is very interesting, you know, in a sense, catalytic, because unlike what has happened in one American provincial city after another, where you build the supermarket outside the city, you know, because you're feeding the suburbs, and destroy the provincial city, it's gone. Well, it becomes antique stores or nothing, empty, ruined, you know. Whereas, of course, different policy could have, different political policy would have insisted on building shopping malls inside the city fabric, and doing what they did here, of course, which is to sustain the shopping frontage and the street, the Avenida Diagonal, with through the symbiotic relationship between the larger shopping facility and the interior of the shopping mall, multi-leveled, etc., etc. And so this building set me off, so to speak, or you can say set me back, because this, of course, is a long time ago. I mean, I became I became kind of preoccupied with what vulgarly called German expressionism, you know, but this is Hans Polzig, House of Friendship, 1917, Istanbul. And of course, there's not a modern thing at all. It's a medieval city in a way, with its minarets and the domes of these mosques, making a kind of profile like, of course, in medieval European cities where you didn't have any high-rises, you just had the spires of churches. But here, you know, we have this form, this stepped House of Friendship, which, you know, looks like this, never built. Actually, obviously, some reference to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon here. You could say it's a species of Orientalism, by the way, if you wanted to be critical. And, but it is also something else which is, I think, also latent in the building I began with, in the Ila block in Barcelona, which is this profile, stepped profile, not stepped like this, of course, but broken, which where the building is sort of is slightly can be read slightly as a metaphor for a geological formation, you know, so that it's a building, but it has this. The landmark aspect is sort of, I think, as a image, operating partly with a kind of geological metaphor. I mean, here you see how it's organized as it's a kind of it was for, you know, a house of friendship, basically, as it, you know, for German scholars and so on and so forth to stay in Istanbul, and you can see that the architecture is sympathetic to that idea. And on a much smaller scale, 1929, Breslau, but could be loosely brought under the rubric of, and I already mentioned it, this question of German expressionism, is this work by Hans Scharoun. It's a kind of very small building, meant to be a sort of mini kind of collective building with a central kind of communal facility and two wings stretching out on either side, as shown here in this plan. But what intrigues me about it is, you know, this kind of dynamic, plastic, horizontal continuity. You know, it's too small, I suppose, to really qualify as a megaform, but I think it goes in that direction. All this, which is obviously related, is, you know, the late 40s, MIT, actually 48, finished. It's Alto Baker dorm running on the edge of the Charles River. Horizontal form, pierced windows, not so unlike, you know, the Euler block, but of course much earlier. And having at the center this this public unit, you know, that unifies these two dormitory wings, and unifies and focuses, you know, the public civic aspect of the development, but while still maintaining the continuity. And I think one finds in Alto's work altogether this very strong sense of profile, landmark, public building, and in unbuilt project by him, which of 1953 for Vogel-Wiedplatz in Vienna, not built, but exemplifying in a way this. It is a building. It's actually an engineered large stadium concert congress complex, with the roof actually designed by, I think, engineered, calculated by Alto's son as a cable suspended roof. But what impresses me is the way in which it is like a kind of small mountain, you know, and the way in which it unifies these heterotopic orthogonal elements with this plastic radial structure space system. And later, in fact 10 years later, he will design this project for Turku, the center of Helsinki, where the autoroute system is now very much a landscape, a kind of megaform, with parking underneath these terraces, which is the rail. Actually, the rail entry is here, and this is a new autoroute. There's Olympic Arena at the end of this, and here, and these are these proposed, never built except for the Finlandia concert hall, to build these public buildings by the side of this lake. And maybe this drawing gives one a better idea both of the lake and of the you know, this is where 4,000 cars are supposed to be parked under these platforms. These are the public buildings, a park, and here the pre-existing this is the Saarinen rail terminal, pre-existing 19th century entry into the city. So I've tried to trace, you know, I mean, one could cite many other projects, I think, but these projects not built. And of course, one of there's a certain pathos to a lot of this, in as much as I'm showing a lot of projects that have not been built. I mean, as well as some works of a more modest character that were built. This is still Alto, of course, but this is someone else entirely. This is 1930. It's this famous Obus project of Le Corbusier for Algiers, in which you know, the autoroute is seen as, you know, to build, in fact, in this case, not with the autoroute on top, but the autoroute at midpoint, and to take it out, to in fact use the autoroute in relation to the contours to unify new mega development, where, you know, the plastic form of the building is very much a topographic landscape form. I mean, there's autoroutes running in the middle of these bent radon blocks, this being the commercial center, and there's an autoroute running well, in one version on top of and another version underneath, in the midpoint of this long Corniche block. It is this project that will influence Jacob Backamer in a project for Tel Aviv 1963, in which the proliferation of little objects, which is what the White City was about, little objects more or less around 5 stories high, built under the British mandate in Tel Aviv, with Dizengoff Circle here and Haifa, the Arab harbour adjacent to Tel Aviv in this position, and the decision, of course none of it carried out, made by Backamer to shift the municipal government and the center, the power center of the city to this, to reincorporate, to remake in fact the Arab harbour with this backbone spine wall, like the Corniche block of the 1930 project of Le Corbusier for Algiers. And the plan, of course, where this long block is a unifying form. I mean, you could, this obviously would also function as a landmark, as a very grandiose, extravagant landmark, also operating with this ambiguity between what is building and what is a sort of geological metaphor. And it's accompanied by these sketches which have always intrigued me, because it's very utopian, of course, to try to imagine a scalar, you know, to organize parking in relation to this spine block, and to relate very small scale objects. I mean, this is a Backamer sketch involving, you know, it's a kind of dreamland really, going from the scale of a table, small house, stepping up to this spinal block, you know, suggesting even maybe some kind of stepped access up into. It's very unclear, of course. It's a slightly dreamy concept sketch, but not, but something that, well, we know was not built. This is actually slightly earlier. It's 4 years before. It's Backamer's project for building in the water, for expanding Amsterdam, also with a long, you know, continuous project, a spine building with also carrying with it transport, of course, and building out into the water, the medieval city of Amsterdam being here. It parallels in a way the 1960 Kenzo Tange Tokyo Bay project 1 year later, and so we see something of this in this photograph of the model. What was built, now oscillating between grandiose projects and built works, is this, which looks fairly grandiose in section, but in fact is built in London 64 to, over a 10-year period, 64 to 74, designed by Patrick Hodgkinson, now known as Brunswick Centre, consisting of these stepped blocks. You know, there are blocks of apartments looking in over this central shopping space with a central cinema on the other axis. I mean, it's inserted into the, like an extrusion, into the 18th century London fabric, residential fabric, and has all the disadvantages of an extrusion, of course, in as much as it is conceptually endless, because there's no kind of, the form doesn't terminate itself. But it has today become, and I don't have, unfortunately, images of it, extremely successful block from a commercial point of view. It looks, you know, somewhat dismal in this shot, but in fact is a very, today, it has been restored and is a very vibrant urban centre, sub-centre, we could say. An idea along these lines also an idea of a small intervention. This is actually in a new town in France, which is Marne-la-Vallée. It is 1980. It is Henri Siriani's concept of la pièce urbaine, urban peace, in which he uses housing to create a kind of micro-urban public space within the housing. In fact, Marne-la-Vallée is an unbelievably chaotic new town, and this is perhaps one of the only points where there is a kind of coherent public realm. Again, a bit like Brunswick Centre, with stepped blocks that look into each other. This is actually linking to a metro station. This is the ring road, and here there's this wall of buildings, and you penetrate this wall to arrive at a kind of place in the midst of the housing. That was 1980. In 1966, Vittorio Gregotti wrote a book called The Territory of Architecture, never translated into English. Exists in Italian, French, I think in Spanish, but has never appeared in English. And it has this idea that well, it first of all has implicit the idea of that urbanization is, by definition, regional. One can only talk about urban regions. One can no longer talk about cities, as Mies says in that prophetic statement. So this is Gregotti Associati, the practice, project for the University of Florence of 1971. That is 5 years after writing this book, The Territory of Architecture, in which you can see that the game, also rather utopian, is to inscribe the fabric of the university into the landscape. I mean, you don't know whether these buildings are, exactly where is the ground level. This perspective makes one think that they are half buried into the landscape, and the model, they are, of course, faculty buildings set in this seemingly arbitrary rhythmic spacing, dormitory blocks and faculty buildings united in this gridded fabric. But what will be built? Very doctrinaire piece of 1973 to 80 is this in the Crati Valley, is this University of Consenza by Gregotti Associati, which is this is actually one continuous line of pedestrian movement, in fact, for 3,200 meters, crossing this valley and linking a railhead at one point to a kind of autoroute connection as another, this continuous line off of which come these university faculty buildings in this fashion. There is this continuous, you could say, of course, here we're almost in megastructural, there is this continuous trussed metal bridge-like form that runs as a spine right down the building, carries services, etc., and on top, of course, the student body is distributed between the faculties that are, then built in block formation off this central spine to either side. Equally, Gregotti Associati, this is in outside Palermo in Sicily. It is 69 to 73. It is a so-called Zen housing. And you can see, actually, that maybe more didactic than any, is this effort, to make this formation into a kind of landmark, to make this housing have a pattern which can be read against this kind of proliferated chaos that surrounds Palermo, and with with a detailed form looking like this. And similar ideas is this for Cefalù, also in Sicily, where the housing blocks in the form of bridges crossing the valley, never built. This being drawing of the same. You know, the influence, I think, of Gregotti, particularly in Italian-speaking world, was rather strong. This is, for instance, a project I think definitely influenced by Gregotti, which is Mario Botta and Luigi Snozzi's project for Zurich, which is 1978, which was, the idea was to augment the existing facilities with a bridge building, viaduct building, that would go across the tracks, the 19th century rail tracks coming into Zurich with this glass, existing glass-covered platform protection over the tracks as it comes to the main station situated here. And it has always intrigued me that this is, it crosses the Seal River, which is a tributary of the Limmat, and so the viaduct, which has rather perversely trees planted on top, marks the line of geological formation, the river, small stream, entering into the major flow of the Limmat. So what had been buried by 19th century railhead is kind of, as it were, remarked by the viaduct building, which you can see here, with parking integrated into the viaduct building. Not built, of course, but maybe this image gives one a better idea of what was intended. So this is the Limmat, this is the 19th century rail terminus, this is the glass roof over the platforms, and here is this bridge building and further air rights development in this position. But behind this bridge building is a parking garage, you know, the effort being to reunite, you know, functionally to use, you know, 20th century autoroute infrastructure and unite it to the 19th century railroad infrastructure. And it is a fact, probably, that the most comprehensive railroad infrastructure in the world is in Switzerland. I mean, you know, the connection between the airport in Cloten to the entire Swiss rail network is absolutely seamless and relatively fast. This same pair, Snozzi and Botta together, would do this project for Perugia, which is a kind of new so-called centro direzionale it's 71 again, in the valley below the hill town of Perugia, linked up, partly linked to the hill town by teleferico. And I think what's intriguing is the way in which this long viaduct form is used to give a kind of order, you know, to the chaos that is already built up around it. These are parking silos, a teleferico links up to the high town. This is the administrative building and linked to an auto route passing underneath in this direction. Yeah, that's the plan. All right, this is something quite different. It is Arthur Ericsson built with the landscape by Cornelia Oberlander. It is hybrid building. I think you know, part of this perhaps is also suggesting that hybrid programs are the appropriate programs for megaforms conceived as significant urban interventions, as landmark structures. I mean, it's my opinion that this development, Robson Square, 1983 to 1986, revitalized the center of Vancouver, played, I would say, a role in relation to Vancouver that is, let's say, comparable to the role played by Rockefeller Center in New York, you know, at the time of the Depression. And hybrid, meaning that it linked, this is a high court, you know, high court shed that then sits on top of a stepped pile, which is the municipal government, with a wedding room that is sort of under a fountain that cascades down into this park, and well, we see it here in a kind of rather abstract plan. And Erickson, who probably should be more recognized in retrospect, would do a number of projects where this idea of megaform seems to be the principle. I mean, he never uses that term, but so I mean, this is actually existing Beaux-Arts building, Beaux-Arts complex, and this you see these ramps, stepped ramps, lead up to this kind of continuous garden that finally ends up in the High Court with this as a continuous kind of center water piece that cascades down over the site. Now this is a section through the High Court with municipal government underneath, and with light courts on the side. And in fact, one of the very brilliant things about it is the edge condition, the relationship between the sidewalk, the planting of the sidewalk, and the building. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, you see the way this is the way the cascade works. It's a model, of course, and the way the stepped garden works. Yeah, these so-called ramps plus steps. This is Arthur Erickson's Simon Fraser University, 1965, where, you know, the university is used to sort of create a micro-public realm, a space of appearance within the complex of the building. So, I mean, in a way, it's quite close to Gregotti, so that this is the sort of central public realm, and the building cascades down in two directions from the top of a slight elevation in the ground. Well, this in Lethbridge, also in Canada, another university, treated as an enormous bridge building. Of course, now you can say, well, is this a megaform or is it a megastructure? I still think, you know, the form is more dominant. However, I suppose you know, it's just on the edge between what one might define as a megaform and what one can identify as a megastructure. This building is quintessentially hybrid. There are many things to be said about it. It's by Foreign Office Architects, by Alexandra Zeropolo and Farshid Musavi. It's 2002. They won it when they were students at the AA together. It was a competition. It's the ferry terminal in Yokohama, Japan. This building intrigues me for. Oh, sorry, this is Lethbridge. Excuse me, section of Lethbridge. This is the Yokohama. Sorry. This building intrigues me because it is many things at once. It's first, of course, primarily a ferry terminal. But it also has built on top of it a park and a kind of Belvedere pier. It's ferry terminal stroke pier stroke park, and inside even it has a theatre. And what I find intriguing about it, beyond this programmatic aspect, is that it is a very rare example of a digitally generated structure, actually very coherently structured, which maintains a kind of coherence about a central axis throughout the entire body of the building, so that built out of welded steel by Japanese shipbuilding industry. And I think you can see that, I think what is very intriguing is that it is constantly moving, but the logic of the organism, so to speak, is maintained throughout its morphological changes, and is exceptional from this point of view, I think. I mean, Frank Gehry is not about this, and not about that kind of structural coherence. This is, these are folded, the structure is welded, folded steel plate structure, over this parking garage accommodation. Which brings us to Stephen Hull and to his hybrid building. It's the title he gave it, which it houses 2,500 people, Beijing, and 2008 completed, and entirely, private development, but entirely heated by geothermal wells, with bridges that contain various complementary facilities, and there is in the center a cinema and a water retaining rain harvest pool, the cinema being in the center of this pool, so that it is also has certain kind of ecological virtues, as well as it being a very complex program. It's not just housing, it's really a kind of city in miniature in many ways. Which brings me to this piece by Stephen in Shenzhen in China, completed in 2009. It's a horizontal skyscraper, so-called by him, built for a very large Chinese contracting company on this high ground overlooking the city, having this form of the public realm is underneath. The elevation of the block allows for air movement, but also for visual access going out to the sea. It is a mixed-use building, hotel, offices, residences, all in one continuous block, looking a bit like this, where the public elements are underneath the this kind of artificial landscape contains various public facilities like nursery schools opening onto courtyards beneath the building. Which brings me to this, which is, as you probably know already, the Olympic Sculpture Park by Weiss and Manfredi. It's finished in 2005 in Seattle. It's unfortunately, I've never seen this work. It is astonishing, I think, the way they were able to wrap this, to weave this park into the rail system and the road system, the existing rail and road system running along the shores of the water, to take this form, where the rail is partly covered by the park, where the park bridges over to the water side, where the road is integrated, also partly channeled into the park. I mean, this is, I think, Now, of course, you know, this, you could say this, in this form, megaform is no longer really a building, is almost exclusively a landscape in and of itself. So this, you know, shows the complexity of the sectional organization in order to accommodate the road and the rail system, you know, and to wrap the park, to weave the park in and out over the top of this space. Which brings me to this, which we're still more of the same, yeah. So, well, it's an incredible achievement, I think. Which brings me to this thing not built, which is Paulo Mendes de Rocha's project for Paris. It's unfortunately a very washed out image, but this is the Canal Saint-Martin. This is what he called a sports boulevard. It was a project made in 2008 as part of the French Olympic bid, but was unsuccessful as a part of that bid, but consisted of these various stadiums for different kinds of sports on top of a kind of elaborate podium block. Altogether there's like 7,000 person seating capacity in the whole thing. And maybe this image is, yeah, this image is a good deal clearer. I mean, what is of consequence, I think, in this is the utter chaos of all this system. You know. This is an urban intervention. It is a kind of megaform, you know. It establishes a definite sort of landscape reference in what is otherwise simply a proliferation of objects. And I think that is its primary merit. I'm going to end with a sort of polemic, you know, which is very provisional. But anyway, it might be of some interest. Since 1980, when the French geographer Jean Gutmann first coined, 1960, when the French geographer Jean Gutmann first coined the term megalopolis, automotive regional urbanization has become the universal land settlement pattern of late capitalism. Stimulated by the mass ownership of the automobile, megalopoli are coming into being all over the world today, accommodating populations of around 20 million apiece in the developing world, to some 5 million in a number of major North American conurbations, Atlanta, for example. You know, these figures perhaps don't mean too much, except when you recognize that, you know, Finland, for example, is a population of 5 million people. You know, I think now Mexico City is 22 million. There are probably some 20 cities in the world which are all urban conurbations over 20 million. I think beginning in the year 2000 and ending in the year 2015, the Chinese, 300 million Chinese would have moved to the countryside into the city. So this is an unbelievable, dramatic shift, you know. The net effect is the proliferation of the non-place urban realm, to coin Melvin Webber's term from his book Explorations in Urban Structures of 1964. One might note in passing that as a corollary to this Utopian dispersal, the world now consumes in 6 weeks the amount of gasoline that it burnt in a single year in the 1950s. So that, of course, this is dramatic in other respects besides the kind of somewhat nostalgic concerns one might have about the loss of the city, the jungle that Mies referred to, you know. This reminds me also of Marc Auger's book, Non-lieu, non-place, you know, an argument that basically that's what we are in, a continuous non-place, you know. That's my first point. Point two, under these circumstances, the stratagems of the time-honored master plan as an instrument of urban design would seem to be untenable, particularly given the relatively limited resources available for public intervention at a civic scale, along with the volatile rate of spontaneous growth and change in most urban areas. While master plans are surely still viable with regard to infrastructure organization, in terms of water routes, rail links, sewage lines, and the distribution of water, energy, and information, they have precious little purchase today on the organization and consolidation of urban form. The third point is the de facto emergence of megalopolitan patterns of land settlement present us with two alternative strategies as far as future urban development is concerned. A, the current ad hoc proliferation of ill-related, relatively isolated freestanding objects which invariably go to make up the non-place agglomeration of contemporary urban environment, or B, place-creating counter-thesis of megaform integrated into a site as a discontinuous exception to the otherwise undifferentiated urban cacophony. I mean, the idea is that urban acupuncture, that these urban interventions can make a difference, you know, that they can even be, of course, exclusively landscape interventions, as in the case of the sculpture park in Seattle. Take this off. So my first provisional point is that it should be clear from the wide range of megaforms cited in the foregoing that a megaform may come into being at quite different scales and therefore assume a distinctly different place creating potential depending not only on the scale but also on the programmatic complexity of the form in each case. Thus, a megaform may vary from being an organic residential continuity, as in the case of Alto's Baker Dorm, to the relatively extensive self-contained civic complex of Arthur Erickson's Robson Square, where stacked law courts are combined with municipal offices and stepped public park, thereby establishing a new space of public appearance in downtown Vancouver. Now, I mean, this brings me to this issue that, which I don't really elaborate here, which is, I mean, one of the things that one constantly feels is that it would make more sense as public policy if, you know, shopping centers were combined with other public facilities so that it would not just be a consumption machine where you come, park the car on blacktop, walk into the building, buy the stuff, out into the car, leave. You know, if it was combined with other programmatic public or semi-public facilities, then, you know, you would you would be moving towards a place rather than the non-place of the average shopping mall. Point 5. A seminal attribute of the megaform is its quintessential horizontality, which is integrated as much as possible with the site and on which it sits. At times, this topographic character may be so dominant as to become a virtual landscape in itself, as in the case of the Igualada Cemetery, which I did not show, by Enrique Miralles outside Barcelona, completed there in 1992, or the Olympic Sculpture Park, Seattle, which I've already mentioned, in 2006 by Michael Manfredi and Marion Weiss. 6. The definition, by definition, a megaform is restricted in its extent. It may thus be realized by the society in a limited time period as a one-off urban intervention capable of affording a programmatically different experience within the seemingly infinite space endlessness of a contemporary megalopolis. It may thus be used to mediate the condition long ago satirized by Gertrude Stein with the ironic phrase, "There is no more there." Well, I think it's self-evident, this potential, at least, you know. 7. As with the 19th century arcade, the megaform has the capacity of providing a public domain, or a semi-public domain, in what is otherwise a totally privatized, processal, and largely placeless environment. One may note in this regard how a megaform may possess a catalytic potential in that, as in the case of the large shopping mall running down the length of the Ila block in Barcelona of 1992, which patently served to maintain the shopping frontage of the Avenida Diagonal. Point 8. Within the space endlessness of the megalopolis, a megaform may also serve as a kind of landmark feature, like a geological outcrop, as in the case of Hans Polzig's House of Friendship of 1917. 9. It would seem that certain contemporary building programs readily lend themselves to being accommodated as megaforms. I have in mind such types as universities, air terminals, railway stations, shopping centres, cemeteries, hospitals, sports facilities, and convention centres, etc. And 10. While megaforms would appear to be mostly readily applicable to the megalopolitan domain, they may also be integrated into traditional urban fabric, as in the case of Rockefeller Center, New York. Clearly, mass housing may also be handled as a megaform, as per Le Corbusier's Plan Obus, projected for Algiers in 1980. And, you know, one could cite also Byker Wall in England by Ralph Erskine. So that's the story. I'm now, as it were, open for questions. Thanks. I don't know how I managed it. I've never given a lecture in 1 hour before in my life, but anyway, here it is. Must be hungry. Questions?
What was point 2?
Think I remember things like this? Yes, right, master planning, yes. About the fact that master planning, you know, well, we have an urban design division at Columbia, run by Professor Richard Plantz, and, you know, who I greatly respect, but nonetheless, you know, students produce projects which no one's going to, you know, it's never going to be realized. I mean, one of the realities is that large-scale urban planning is, well, first of all, the political difficulties of realizing it, but secondly, of course, the time it takes to realize it, and the rate of obsolescence, you know, that limited urban interventions have the possibility of being relevant and also having a catalytic effect which go beyond their boundaries. I mean, if one wants to plan, you know, in the radiant city fashion, or let's say in the fashion of Chandigarh for that matter, you know, the time you finish the plan, it's already, I mean, the speed of change is such that it tends to already be obsolete. Yes.
Do you see this proposal as a circumstance of where society is right now? Or do you see it as an answer to what we're left with dealing with in a built environment, that being the result of an automobile-centered society, extermia, etc.?
Well, it is sort of very much related to the second. I mean, let me deal with that first and come back to the first part of the question. I think that, in fact, it may also, the two questions maybe one really, but I mean, yes, I mean, we are where we are because of the automobile utopian mode of development. And of course we are at the limit of that because of the gasoline consumption, but also, well, the impact, the consequences of gasoline consumption. I mean, we could of course change to a lot of fuel, but we're not doing that in too much of a hurry. Actually, it seems the Chinese will achieve it before we achieve it. The electrical, well, of course, it's still burning a lot of energy. I mean, the amount of commutation that represents. And particularly, of course, you know, to do with freight, you know, and since it's all so dispersed, it would be difficult to go back to centralized rail distribution, for example, would be very difficult. I mean, it's clear that high-speed rail, you know, which is, and again, one wonders whenever this country would get round to building any high-speed rail at all, you know. It is, I think, more or less established that up to 500 kilometers apart, it's faster and cheaper to link urban centers by high-speed rail than it is to use aircraft. So you know, the whole Boston-Washington corridor is just sitting there. You know, it's an absolute gift to high-speed rail because you have to sort of put the money into it. But the other thing that is becoming, I think, manifest is that, you know, how is the United States, and that doesn't, it's not only the United States, but it is the United States, going to maintain this enormously extended infrastructure? You know, the cost, it's already evident, the cost of maintaining bridges and the cost of maintaining all of this is probably going to become prohibitive, you know. And so it is, I mean, I suppose, you know, this idea of urban megaform is a kind of, you know, it has a certain aspect of retrenchment about it, you know, of trying to sustain a kind of, well, a space of public appearance within a continuous built form. But you could say that these two things are a little disconnected, you know, this issue about energy and maintenance of infrastructure and the over-dependence on the automobile. You could say that the Megaform project and that condition are slightly disconnected. But the first part of your question was, I didn't quite get that. It was like the state of society as it is now, and it's the same thing really, isn't it? I didn't quite get the first part of the question.
I guess the question is, with the automobile being just a particular modernization, and considering society to be moving forward, is this proposal merely dealing or truly dealing with the advancement of society, or is it still fixing the woes of the automobile?
Oh yeah, that's better. Well, it's a compensation for the privatization of the society. I mean, it is a kind of idea of compensation, really. You know, the privatization resulting from the automotive distribution and the atomization of of the continuous urbanized region, you know. So it is a kind of idea about compensating for that to some extent. I mean, well, the example I begin with, you know, which is this block built in Barcelona, is hybrid in the sense in that it combines, say, offices, hotels, school, a shopping mall, and the shopping frontage. You know, so it's still, so it is trying to reconcile and compensate in that, you know, the shopping frontage is the 19th century shopping frontage on a 19th century street. And but behind it is 20th century, you know, concentrated shopping facility, which is fed by parking. I didn't make that point quite clear enough, which is that, you know, outside of Barcelona you can see this form, this landmark, and you can take a car and drive into its basement and use its capacity as a commercial outlet, or for that matter, commute to it to actually work in the office space, you know. So it is partly compensatory. Yeah, I think it is compensatory, and also it tries to reconcile two different systems, both of of commerce, yes, and also the use of urban space.
Really distinctive projects in Barcelona, Gregotti, and some of the ones I really think are wonderful are in Rhode. And they've obviously come out of a particular set of circumstances, private investments, some municipal authority, some sort of political scenario, planning scenario. Is there something there that can be learned by planners in the United States from that particular combination of factors that produce such beautiful projects?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, Robson Square is it's not the United States, it's Canada, it's still, that is a lot of state investment, I think, mainly. I mean, public-private partnerships are obviously possible, you know, but I haven't not used that phrase, but I will now, which is this. Which is, you know, this maybe slightly problematic phrase of landscape urbanism, and you know, which maybe Charles Waldheim is the most kind of eloquent representative at this moment, you know, and I mean this actually that interests me because this potential for integrating landscape. As in MIT, which I learned this evening, with planning, you know, to actually put into the planning division landscape as a discourse, you know, because I think that urban design and urban planning and architecture probably have more to learn from landscape than the other way around, you know. So maybe from the point of view of policy, you know, that landscape is you know, it suggests all sorts of potential for mediating the effects of this kind of space endlessness, I think, you know. And also you could say mediating the effects of climate change to some extent, you know. Actually, I didn't show it, but I have been very impressed by Peter Walker's IBM campus in Salona, in West Texas, where 800 acres was laid out by one person, you know, at one go, and very cleverly laid out from the point of view of reseeding the site, you know, using the earth from the road system to improve the topsoil and reseed the site. Admittedly, in the end, it's one client, IBM, but you know, I think what architect or planner, for that matter, is going to have the concept maybe, or even the legitimacy at a public level to lay out 800 acres. I'm not sure that happens too often. Yeah.
I'm wondering, Euroville and
some of the criteria for some of the projects you've been looking at, I was wondering if you maybe talk about, is there a specific reason why it's not
You're talking about, yes. Well, I mean, I'm not too happy with Ren Kulas, but I mean, apart from that, yeah, maybe, I mean, you know, I do think that, as I said, this is very sketchy in a way, you know, it would need something much more systematic to make it, that's why I thought that the title should be changed, you know, which would mean then to do something more, you know, this idea of interstitial form and regional urbanization might be a better title to get one off this, the megaform business as an exclusive idea, and to, you know, but it's a bigger project. And then maybe one would have to look at Lille. I mean, there are many things to be looked at. I mean, the fact that in France, you know, I only know this figure whose name is Michel Devine, who's a very good French landscape architect. I mean, almost all the light rail in France, and also the TGV, I think the budget allocated by the state is that 1/3 of the budget is for landscape, to reintegrate the new transit system into the topography, you know. I mean, that's a policy decision at the level of the state, you know. But I mean, that would, if one were to do something more comprehensive with this not very well worked out idea, then, you know, one would have to include stuff like that. Yeah.
Highlighting on the words city and jungle, what, in your opinion, is a solution, direction, or future movement for the city? Should it be rigid, or should it be ready for change, evolution, new technologies, rapid changing lifestyle, culture? Should it be morphing continuously or in phases?
The last part again?
Should it be morphing continuously or in changes, a city or an establishment, an architectural establishment? In terms of being a jungle and rapid change.
I mean, what I like about that phrase of Bies is that, you know, this kind of resigned, yes, you know, this old European business of the city, which he was born into and lived through, you know, recognizing, coming to the United States and realizing it's not possible, you know, already in the late 40s, you know. And what to do, you know, if I understood the question correctly, you know, with existing urbanization, you know, is to, you know, you have this possibility to, I think the society has this possibility to intervene in a fragmentary way in order to provide a kind of public realm, really. I mean, I think what is very disturbing is the way in which the environment is extremely privatized, you know. And but this could only be done on a sort of piecemeal basis, I think, you know. Hence, you know, this idea of urban acupuncture and so on, right? Which reminds me of something else, which is that, you know, I've never been, well, there are a lot of things I've never been to, and one of the places I've never been is Curitiba. Perhaps some of you have been in Brazil. But, and this whole development in Curitiba, which is actually the fundamental improvement of the infrastructure through designated bus lanes, you know, rather than light rail or underground rail. I mean, fortunately for that project, there was already a kind of coherent gridded fabric, so that it was more, you know, you could put down a kind of designated bus lane system. And then many other benefits. But the point I wanted to make is that there is no really systematic study of Curitiba. You know, we know about it, but we don't know about it. You know. And incidentally, Jaime Lerner, who was the prime mover of Curitiba, as mayor of Curitiba for 15 years, it's also someone who coined the term urban acupuncture. You know, so there's a sort of rival to Manuel de Sola Morales' use of this term. I don't know if that's an adequate answer, but it's the best I can do.
Ken, you just mentioned Curitiba.
Yeah.
Another interesting example of what you call urban acupuncture is Medellin, in Colombia.
Yeah, right.
And what we can start to see in many places is that there is a sense of young architects actually becoming involved in the politics of places, politics of cities, in order to not only be able to build new projects, but actually to transform the lives of many of their fellow citizens.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the space of public appearance, I cannot help by thinking that the question of form, which is the visual outcome or the generation for many people, is actually always rendered real via politics. And the space of public appearance, in a certain way, is a political.
Yeah, right.
And perhaps it would be interesting if you could comment a little bit on how you see, you know, because many of these projects that you showed also rely on the idea of imagining different futures. The notion of the modernism as progress have to do with the idea of future.
Right.
So in a certain way, given that this is a very significant talk for all of us, if you could help us envision, how do you see that in the context of education, in the context of architecture education, connected to students working not only in their worlds, but actually in that world that we still want to transform? Question?
Yeah. Well, in a way, I mean, though I know it's very fashionable, this question of energy and sustainability, if it's very broadly understood, is one way of sort of entering into this politically, I mean, because, well, the fact, I mean, I think it is a fact that this country will have an incredible difficulty in maintaining its infrastructure. I mean, very often you get it, that these bridges are going to go, and where is the money coming from to build the bridges? Well, of course, this country is a very rich country, so it could start to use its resources for a different way from the way it uses its resources at the moment. But it would also mean a different politics, of course, to do that. Given particularly the current discourse, it's like couldn't be further removed from that, I think. Yes, I mean, this question of micro public realm, or to bring that issue to the fore, at whatever scale, I think is important. I'm obsessed with this term, space of public appearance, and which is a Hannah Arendt, of course, and actually, recently, I think you see something, which is that although the internet, etc., has played a major role in political manifestations of recent date, what is kind of very necessary and, of course, very problematic. I mean, by problematic, I mean proto-violent, is, of course, movement of people into the street. This old, very old business of actually going into the street, which of course is very difficult to do in suburbs, because where is it? That's it. It's been very carefully evaporated. But where there is still streets, that's where people go. To exert pressure, I think, is I mean, on the front page of the New York Times today is this demonstration in Nice, you know, which says, what does it say? Yes, people before finance, big bang, you know, ready for the G20 event. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. Thank Kenneth Frampton. Conversation going. We have a few tables of our finest hors d'oeuvres back at the architecture building. You're all welcome to join us back there.